Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. My guest today has managed to make one of the most dreaded subjects on earth, taxes, actually kind of fun. And I have to admit, I walked away from this conversation feeling really good about the tax situation that we can have as expats, as digital nomads, as people living in other countries. Her name is Kathy Paolo. She is the owner of Wanderer's Wealth, and she talks to us a lot about how to make your tax situation as an expat or as somebody that's traveling around the world advantageous to you. So she's a full-time digital nomad herself, a former corporate tax lawyer, and now strategizes with individuals who are traveling around the world or living in a foreign country on how to avoid getting into messy tax situations, and also how to actually make it advantageous for you. It actually can be. But there's a lot to dig into, and it's a complicated subject, and one that most of us really try to avoid. So that's why there's pros out there like Kathy. So we talk about taxes a good bit, but we do it in a fun way, and she does it in a very fun way across all her social media handles. So we'll share info on all that. But don't worry, it's not all about taxes. We're also talking about some of the places that she's currently traveled to. She's in Bali, she's in Mexico, she's in Australia, she's all over the place. And so she shed some light on those areas as well. Very good time catching up with Kathy. Probably the most fun I've ever had talking about taxes. So I hope you will enjoy as well. Please help me in welcoming Kathy to About Abroad. Hey, Kathy, welcome to the show. Thanks for stopping by.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Where are you right now? Are you in Bali?
I am in Bali right now, yes.
Oh, I'm jealous. I've never been there.
Actually not. It's one of the
No.
biggest digital nomad hubs.
I know I'm a total loser in this digital nomad realm if I haven't been to Bali, I guess. But I gather you kind of spend a good bit of time there. Is that right?
Yes, I've been here for now about 2 months, and before that, in the last 3 years, I've spent a fair bit amount of time in Bali. I've always been in and out, so usually spend about 2 months time in Bali and then fly out again and do the whole digital nomad life.
Yeah, you're living a pretty exciting life, at least through the eyes of your social media and everything that I gather. So I'm really looking forward to digging into some of that and hearing, a little bit more about what you do and sharing with the audience some about your story, because I think it's super interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm happy to dig into it.
Maybe you could start. I think it's really cool that on some profile that you have, you sort of describe yourself as a global citizen, and you talk about your sort of roots and what you're doing now. And I can imagine how that sort of all ties into this big life change that you made over the last several years and the lifestyle you're living now. So maybe you could kind of just start there with like your roots as a global citizen and what that means to you, if that is in fact important to your kind of identity, which is what I gather.
Yeah, most certainly. So, especially when I'm traveling around a lot, the first question when you meet strangers is always, where are you from? And, my heart always starts pounding a little bit because I'm like, I really don't know. Like, I'm from everywhere. I'm truly a global citizen. But yeah, that is the case because I was born in Mexico. I grew up in Switzerland and I moved to Australia 7 years ago on my own. And I've got several different passports and residencies. So I am really a global citizen on paper and even more so in real life. Usually during normal times, I would travel around quite a bit. I have slowed down though, especially now with arriving here in Bali. It's like my first trial in the slow nomad lifestyle. And I have to say, I've got really bad itchy feet. Like, I was just saying to my partner today, like, can you give me our migration agent's numbers? Like, I need to figure out how we can go out and come in back again because I need to leave. Yeah, it's a serious
What
case.
is a long what does a long period of time look like? How long till the itchy feet set in?
Usually around 2 months. I'm like, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
seen it, done it, ready to go on.
I love it. Yeah, I sort of I went from like nomading a lot to like a slow mad phase, like month to month and like quarter to quarter. And then like, oh, well, I'll be here for like a year. And now I've been in Valencia for 3 years and like we travel a good bit, but like I do have these spells of like, I just got to go. I got to go. That's why we got a camper van. Like my wife and I bought a camper van and we're like, we just got to be able to go like weekend, week, whatever. We need some freedom and flexibility to just move because it does get quite addicting, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, campervan is a really great alternative to satisfy my itchy feetness, I would say. It's just because you're constantly on the move and you're constantly seeing new things as opposed to, I guess waking up every day at the same spot. Although during those 2 months that we've been here, we've still traveled to different islands and have plans on going to different spots. So that keeps me very happy.
Oh, that's great. So what's the normal like in typical times? What would your schedule be like? Your travel schedule? Are you generally like constantly on the move, or you kind of go to places for a week, couple weeks at a time? How does it look?
Okay, so now I've had about 3 years of being a digital nomad, and in the first year it was go, 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 and then I would say we would never spend longer than 3 nights in one place and then move on. And then the pandemic hit, and then we started traveling a bit slower, but we got a van as well. So we were kind of stuck in Australia and traveling all through Australia. We did the East Coast, we did the West Coast, saw it all. Once we had seen it, we were ready to take off. So we were one of the only people that got, I guess, a travel exemption to leave Australia. And then we moved over to Mexico, which was one of the easiest places to move to during the pandemic. And now we're in Bali. But even then, we've been moving around everywhere in Mexico. And now, for the first time in the last 2 months, is when we've slowed down in like 3 years.
Sounds pretty awesome. Where were you in Mexico? All over.
Yeah. Started out in Oaxaca, then we went to Tulum, Playa del Carmen area, Cancun, and then we went back to the West Coast to Sayulita to surf a little bit.
Nice. Back to your roots and
Yeah.
where it all started in Mexico.
Ex-
Speaking of your roots, like growing up in Switzerland, I mean, I have like an infatuation with Switzerland. I'm living here on the Mediterranean, but I'm very much so a mountain person, and actually we'll be spending the summer in the Alps with the camper van is the idea. So I'm curious, like, do you miss Switzerland? Or I also have, I will say, like, I'll preface this with, I have some Swiss friends or colleagues or people that have grown up in that area that live in other countries. And when I ask them, like, why would you leave this like paradise? You get mixed reviews, but
yeah.
I have heard something along the lines of like, it can be a little bit like stuffy. I just needed to
Mm.
like get out and try something different. Does that resonate with you at all? Or,
Yeah,
or are you
definitely.
just like, no, it's just as great as it looks in the Instagram pictures?
Yeah, so I knew I wasn't gonna live forever in Switzerland. I wanted to get out. Mostly also I really love the ocean. So I wanted to be somewhere where it's warm, close to the ocean. I will say though, summers in Switzerland are beautiful, especially if you're close to a river. And like I've got some of my fondest memories growing up. They're always in summer by the river and yeah, much fun and always out hiking in nature. But I just realized that there's other cultures out there and that people tend to be nicer and warmer out in other cultures. Switzerland is still very much I would say, a closed up culture. You know, you don't necessarily talk to strangers. Everyone's just sitting on public transportation on their own, not speaking to each other. So I guess that was my first push as to why I wanted to go into another culture and experience some sort of different lifestyle. I found that even now, when I go back and visit my friends and whatnot, you know, it's very much a working culture, and people seem to be working all the time, and when they're not, they're on holiday somewhere else in another country. So it's kind of, there's not real like middle ground. So yeah, but I love Switzerland and nature, and I love going back and snowboarding. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't get it. I mean, the summers there in the mountains, and then the winters with the skiing, access to the slopes is like insane, like world class on both ends. But yeah, I can imagine, like we all, if you're on this show and you're living a life like you're living, like the itchy feet do get, like, have a place in your life, and you can't help but just want to go out and explore other cultures and try new places to live. How, I'm curious about Switzerland. I mean, moving from Switzerland to Australia, what prompted that, and how, and like logistically, how were you able to make the move to Australia and stay? Because I think that could be interesting for people to know, especially like Europeans listening to the show. Like, how does one move to Australia?
I've always had a weird obsession with Australia, and I guess it started in my childhood because one of my childhood friends, she was half Swiss and half Australian, and I grew up basically in their household. So whenever I would be over there, even her mom would talk to me in English, and they would talk a lot about Australia and kangaroos and all of that. So I think subconsciously that was all ingrained into me, and when I grew up and saw all the pictures from Australia, I was like, yeah, I need to go there. And then when the first opportunity presented itself, I had to get over there. So I was able to go over there because I got a job. I was working at the Swiss Embassy in Australia, in Canberra, not necessarily the hotspot where people want to settle down in Australia, but I had a great year. It was a great time. And then the other thing as well is usually people, Europeans, tend to go over to Australia on a working holiday visa, which gives them permission to stay, I think, maximum 2 years in Australia and just work a bit, travel, and have, you know, a pleasant time for those 2 years. And then it gets a bit tougher in order to be able to stay, to obtain residency. It's not as easy, and it's also pretty much on the pricier side of things. But yeah, I was working at the embassy, and then I knew I wanted to continue with my studies and ended up doing a postgraduate in Australia, which then led me to be able to have student visas and in the end getting into what they call a skilled migration list. So Australia has a list of jobs that they're basically lacking, or that they're, you know, looking for from other countries to come in. So if your job is on that list, you're able to apply, even if you've never lived in Australia, even if you've never set foot into Australia. If your job is on that list and you qualified for the job, you've had the experience, you also need to take an English exam and all different sort of requirements. Then based on your application, you might be able to get an invitation to come and live in Australia, which is what I got. So
what was your, I think I know the answer, but what was your occupation that was so much needed?
A lawyer.
Oh, and it was not what I thought. Never mind.
Yeah.
All right.
I ended up studying law and becoming a lawyer, fully accredited, and then was able to apply to that job on the list.
Okay, interesting. So we'll have to come back to that then, because you eventually make your move to being a specialist in international accounting, and so somehow that transition made. I'm curious about that. I would just want to touch on that occupation list real quick, because that a lot of people that listen to the show are looking for legal opportunities to move to other countries and stay. And so what would be like, what would somebody want to look up to find that? And do you know, like, kind of, are they mainly like white collar jobs, like, or is there a general kind of any generalities you could share around that?
Yeah, it's pretty. So the list is called Skilled Migration List, and there's a lot of jobs on there. And they keep changing it as well on a quite regular basis. So when I started my studies, I was praying and hoping that they wouldn't take lawyers off that list, because that's what they do. Whenever they've reached certain quotas or whatnot, they just take it off the list and then you can't apply anymore. But there are so many jobs in various different industries. There's, from chefs to even like media marketing managers, and then other, more, I guess, white collar jobs such as doctors, lawyers that are on the list. So it's very massive variety.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I think New Zealand has something
Mm-hmm.
similar because a friend of mine was trying to do that in nursing, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think also
Yeah.
Canada does have a list with certain jobs on there.
Cool. That's great to know. Okay, so like one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on the show is to talk about what you currently do for a living, which is super interesting and very helpful. One of the things that we try to cover on the show is like really diving into some of the practical details of what it means to be a digital nomad, to be an expat living in another country. Like there's all the fun stuff and the inspirational stuff, but then there's also like the, hey, you have to actually like legally make this work, visas, taxes, international insurance, things like this. So your specialty is taxes, I believe. I'll let you describe it better than I can, but maybe we could start before getting directly into that with sort of like how you came to be in this role, because I also think that's really interesting because like myself, you sort of left, if I understand it right, you left a more traditional job, and that took some guts to do and a big transition, and then started on your own path. And so I think that can be exciting to kind of talk about and to share, like, how to go about making that big transition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so all throughout my studies, I studied for like 7 years. I was always working next to my studies, doing random job from, tutoring, babysitting. I was a swim teacher. I did it all. And then I ended up as well in a law firm at the same time as I was doing my legal studies. And so I was exposed to that field for a while before I actually also became an accredited lawyer. And then I just had spent so much time working and studying and focusing on that I felt once I was done that I just wanted to take some time off and travel. And in Switzerland, it's quite common. Like most of my friends did a gap year, and I never did one. I just went straight into working and studying. And so I felt that after having finished my studies, I really wanted to take a gap year. So it wasn't that hard, to be honest, for me to say, you know what, I'm going to take this time off. It's about time. And, I've put it off for so long. And I think one of my biggest confrontations was with my parents, because I always felt that they wanted to see me achieve something academically, which I did. And then after that, I sort of I really called my mom and I was like, I'm done. I'm taking off now. And she was like, really?
Arrived
Yeah,
on leaving.
yeah. She's like, really? You sure? Like, yeah, I had a secure job, and I knew I was going to be in a very comfortable position and whatnot. But I was like, yep, I just know I want to travel and see the world more. So it wasn't that tough of a decision. I had already kind of made it internally, and I also knew I wasn't made for an office environment. It was just not really for me. I could see, a lot of internal bureaucracy, and I could see how it would take me a while to sort of climb up the corporate ladder. And I was like, is this really it? Like, I don't really see this being this fun. And the thing that really got me was that I knew that I loved traveling and going on holiday, because I had traveled since I was able to afford my own trips at the age of 18, and always next to my studies, I was saving and going overseas to Vietnam, Uganda, and all the places. But then the fact that I was full-time employed and having to submit a letter to ask for permission to go on holiday, that's what just set me off. I was like, there's no way someone else can tell me when I can take off and not, because I used to be a good worker, and like they would rely on me, and it was almost like, oh, we can't let you go unless you find a replacement. And I was like, what? Like, is
You're
that?
getting punished for being good at your job.
Yeah,
Like, no, sorry, you're too good.
I was like, how is this possible that they're not letting me go? And I already had booked my trip as well, so I was like, that's it. Like, I'm going. So yeah, that's really what set me off. And then I didn't really have a long-term strategy in place. Like, I just knew I wanted to take that year off. I had money set aside, and I was like, I'll just go and travel for as long as money lasts, and when it's kind of over, then I come back, and I know I will have a job somewhere with what I have in my pocket. So, and then
It takes making that little leap of faith sometimes, right? Like you sometimes, I mean, I don't know many people. I'm trying to think like of everybody I've had on this show, other people that I talk to in similar situations that have taken that leap of faith. Nobody really ever regrets it.
oh
Like
no.
it's always kind of scary. Like, it doesn't sound like you were actually scared at all. You were like, oh, this is just what I'm doing. But maybe somewhere in you, it was like a little bit of apprehension. Sounds like your mom had some apprehension. I know my parents, when I left my kind of like, my safe job and was like climbing the ladder and quote unquote, like doing well, they were like, my dad's like response, he was like, what, are you effing crazy? Like legitimately, he's like, you can't do that. And I'm like, yeah, I think I'm gonna go teach English in Chile or something, I don't know. Like, and so anyway, like there's some apprehension, but it does seem to like always work itself out, which is something I love, like hearing those stories, because it is true.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And 3 years later, and I'm still kind of on my gap year. Like, it just kind of worked itself out, and opportunity presented itself once I decided to take that first step. And things went down, like, once I made that decision that I was gonna go and leave, I knew I still had 6 months left at my job before I was actually gonna quit. But then I still had another trip planned. So I went on that trip, met my current partner, who is a travel blogger, and he was like, do you want to come and travel the world with me? And I was like, I was already going to go and travel the world. Okay, let's do this together. So, and then things just fast forwarded, and he basically pushed me to do it before, that 6 months period that I had set myself was over. So I basically came back from that trip, quit my job then and there, sold everything I had, gave up my apartment, and just took off. And that was
So, sounds great. I absolutely love it. So now, I mean, you studied law. You were working in a law firm. Was it tax law in particular, or how did you make the transition to being like, involved in what you're doing today?
Yes, so I'm an international tax consultant, is what I would call myself. And I started very early on when I started my studies with economic history. So I was always sort of obsessed with finding out how economics work and how different economies work. And then I ended up doing international taxes because I think it's one of the core functions of how finance systems work. And at the same time, I was working at a tax law firm who was specializing on international dealings and international M&As and yeah, all different sort of international tax issues. So I did that as well as taking various different international tax subjects at uni. So it was a great combination of being able, like I know so many people who study law, first of all, they're never really able to do what they want to study or practice in. They just have to take whatever's available. But I was actually able to combine both, like what I liked and had an interest in with where I was working at the same time. So that was excellent. And then we started dealing with a couple of people who had some tax residency issues. There's a lot of Australians who work on yachts or internationally on waters. So that's how I first got into the whole tax residency space and, like what to do if you're dealing with various different countries. But it was very much focused on corporate tax issues, as opposed to now what I do is really on an individual, personalized basis, where I give advice to people, where to move to, where to set up their tax residencies, where to set up their companies, very much on an individual level. Most of those people are self-employed though, so the company aspect does come into play as well.
Interesting. Yeah. And so describe for someone like, a lot of people listening may not have ever actually moved abroad or done the digital nomad thing. So why does this create an issue just on it obviously depends on the country you're from and where you're traveling to and everything in your individual situation. But generally speaking, like why is your role so important for this demographic of the world?
Yeah, so it's actually very common for people to never have heard about tax residencies unless they've moved abroad. But it's such an important topic because basically your tax residency is tied to the country that you live in. And that means that country has the power to tax you and you will be obliged to pay taxes to the country. But if you start moving around, then you might potentially fall into tax residencies in other countries and will have an obligation to pay taxes in your new home country. And depending on where you're from, if you're from the US, who's got a citizenship-based taxation system, you will have to always, or for as long as you keep your citizenship, your US citizenship, pay taxes in the US. But also if you move abroad and move out of the US, you will have a new tax obligation in your new home country. So you might end up in a situation where you're being double taxed. And that does not just go for people from the USA, that also goes from people who are from other high taxing Western countries, is what I call them. People who come from the UK, Australia, Canada. If you move around and you didn't really cut your ties properly with your old home country, you might still have an obligation with two different countries at the same time and might be double tax. So
yeah, for anyone listening that hates tax season and dealing with the IRS or your home country's IRS, imagine dealing with multiple IRSs on a yearly basis. I can attest it is not the most enjoyable part of living abroad. And I've been using a specialized company. We were talking about them before, Kathy, called Greenback Tax for many years. That they help me with filing my taxes. And I think something that's really cool that you're doing is really helping people strategize that tax situation. So just like a corporate entity might strategize their taxes and put entities in offshore places or in other countries to take advantage of tax situations, you can do that on an individual basis. And I think you've just released a course on kind of how to put yourself in an advantageous situation if you are a digital nomad or expat living abroad. Is that correct? We'll be right back to the show after a quick break for a note from our sponsor. This season is brought to you by my good friends over at Insured Nomads. They're the absolute best in the business when it comes to providing health, travel, and medical insurance for nomads, expats, and really just all forms of world travelers. I know insurance is often something that's overlooked when we're fantasizing about traveling the world, but it's absolutely necessity that we address this because often the policy you have in your home country isn't going to cover you while you're abroad. And it's also a requirement, as a lot of people may not realize, to actually buy private travel or expat insurance, as it's called sometimes, to obtain a visa or even enter certain countries. So fortunately, there are companies like Insured Nomads to help us with this. Not only do they have excellent coverage and great prices, but they're also providing a first-class experience with additional perks and best-in-class technology via their app. It's an amazing experience. I can't recommend it enough. Now, this is a company that was built by world travelers for world travelers. So they know what it's like to find yourself in a difficult medical situation abroad, and they want to keep you from having that same bad experience. So the next time you're planning a trip abroad, whether it's for a week or a lifetime, check out Insured Nomads via the link in the show notes. Okay, now back to the episode.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, because I've done for a long time now one-on-one consulting. I kind of figured out, a blueprint or a way that makes sense to people who come from a non-tax background of how to go about it. Because people who come to me, they usually just come to me and they're like, I have no idea where to even start, what to do, like, how do I figure all of this out? And is there even a solution to, having to pay taxes in two places and how to go around it? And so, yeah, I put all of my knowledge in this online course, and I have had some very great feedback that it's really great explained, that it all of a sudden makes sense to people, that they have a tangible blueprint that they can follow and that they can apply to their individual circumstances. Plus, it contains, various different tax exemption schemes, tax residencies all over the world that people can take advantage of, because that's one of my biggest missions, is just simply sharing this knowledge. It's always written law. This tax exemption schemes, like, I'm not making them up. They're part of national laws. It's just that people don't really talk about it. And I think now that remote working and being able to move around so much easier is becoming so popular, it's time, that we start talking about these different tax residencies and tax exemption schemes that are out there that will save people a lot of money in their taxes, but that not many people take advantage of.
Yeah, that's a great point. Taxes are an inevitable part of life. Like, we all have to pay them, death and taxes, right? But instead of looking at it as this like pain that we have to deal with, if you can look at it as like taking advantage of the systems that are in place, like the rules are there for a reason. And we hear all the time about companies, oh, Amazon paid nothing in taxes last year. And you hear about these companies that are leveraging the tax system. Trump, his tax returns come out and he didn't pay any taxes. And you go, how is that possible? The systems are in place. You just have to know how to take advantage of them. And I'm not saying that in a negative way, like take advantage of them in a negative way, but more so like leverage them to your benefit. And if you're not an expert in it, I'm a huge proponent of like outsource what you're not good at. Mm-hmm. And it's better for me to hire you to tell me what's correct for me to do than me to try to sit there and figure it out and beat my head against the wall because it's not what I'm good at. So I'm a big proponent of like hire the pros, especially as when you're dealing in international stuff. Like, as an American, I understand, even on the most basic level, I understand the way the IRS works and a tax return, but like put me in Spain or Ecuador or Japan or wherever, and like that all becomes very muddy waters, and it's very easy to make a big mistake that could cost you a bunch of money, or a big mistake where you could have saved some money. So it's very important what you're doing. And I think people just like need to look at it as an opportunity, not like this like pain they have to deal with.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that goes as well, with anything related to finances or even your personal bookkeeping. It's like, once you understand the numbers and can put it together, then you can put together a plan and know where you can save more. Or, once you understand what different tax credits there are available, you'll actually be able to take it to your benefit. And it's nothing to be scared of or not. It's literally available for people who take it.
Yeah. Do you see it shifting? Like generally speaking, like there's all these new digital nomad visas and remote work visas that are emerging as remote work is becoming more mainstream. I have the sense, like, you can totally correct me if I'm wrong, but I have the sense that like there's been such a small number of people working this way. Digital nomadism sort of a new thing, that like the governments haven't really taken the time to optimize their tax system for getting tax revenue from people who are there temporarily. It's kind of like, all right, yeah, they're here, but like there's not enough of them for it to matter. And I see that sort of shifting, like they're creating visas for these people so that you can legally be there. But also with that, they want some tax revenue in most cases. And so I don't know, like I know there was something recently released about you shared some information about the European Union investing in fighting against tax fraud and tax evasion. And like, do you see this sort of shifting, this whole landscape?
Yeah, most certainly. Yeah, it's funny. When I started out, I was always saying, like, governments should take advantage of this new wave of digital nomads, remote workers. And then as soon as the pandemic hit, governments were like, okay, yeah, everyone's going remote working now. We need to create something. So the digital nomad visas and remote workers visas that were created are definitely a sign of that. And not just to accommodate, I guess this new way of working, but also kind of to take advantage of it from the government's perspective. If they create these solutions for remote workers and digital nomads, then they're able to get in more revenue into their own country. So it's a way for them as well to benefit from it. And it very much, I think there's around 20, 25 countries now that do have digital nomad visas, and they very much differ. Like their requirements are very different from each other. In some cases, you need to be showing that you earn at least 1,200 euros per month. In other cases, you need to show a monthly income of 3,000 euros per month. So they vary, and they vary also in terms of whether or not you have to pay taxes. In some cases, they want you to pay taxes, so you fall within the system and you have to contribute to the country. In other cases, they say, no, your tax obligation will stay with your old home country. So yeah, there's definitely new incentives created by governments to accommodate to remote workers and digital nomads, but also to raise their revenues, right? They have their own interests as well. And then on the other side, you also see like new regulations coming out that need to accommodate this new digitalized economy, because most of the times tax rules were written in the 80s, and they just simply don't apply anymore to our day and time. Like whenever, because I have to go back into the books and read through, double taxing agreements and all of those things, and it just does not make any sense. Especially for remote workers who, you're working for a company, but you're set up overseas, and you might be dealing with what you call in tax language permanent establishment rules. And then you go into those rules, and they're all made in terms of you will have a permanent establishment when you have an office or a warehouse. And I'm like, who has a warehouse and an office these days? Like no one's gonna be caught by these rules. So, and in practice, they have tax offices have put out regulations where they are like, oh, now as well in the digitalized economy, it doesn't count anymore just to have tangible assets, because most businesses these days don't necessarily have tangible assets anymore. It's all intangible assets. It's all in the cloud. There's not even a server anymore. So it doesn't make sense at all. And so that goes for the tax rule part. And then when we look at tax residency rules in determining when people will fall within tax residency rules, they were as well usually written around the 80s. And, people even back then, I mean, my grandparents as well, they emigrated. They moved from one country to one country, but to another country. But that was usually it. People weren't moving around like we are in this day and age. That's actually why double taxing agreements were made, because, people were still emigrating back then. But and then it was easy to be able to determine tax residency on a 6-month rule, or what we call the 183-day rule. But in this day and age, I don't stay usually 183 days in one place. I keep moving around, and so do many other people. And then they're simply not going to be caught under tax residency rules. And for example, Australia was just the latest example. They've been trying to change their tax residency rules since 2017, which is now almost 4 years. and it's still being held up in parliament, and they're trying to get it through. So it takes a lot of time for governments to make changes, which is our benefit right now, but they're definitely catching up, in terms of writing new rules. They're realizing, okay, this is no longer applicable. People move around, we catch flights, and the economy is completely different from what it was 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah. So look, let's clarify a couple things to make sure like anybody listening understands some of these, because it can get really messy. So double taxation, like generally speaking, you should be able to avoid double taxation, correct? Like in terms of you, even if you're paying into two different countries, you shouldn't necessarily end up paying like 40% in one country and 40% in another country. Like it should, there's some formula generally in place to make sure that you don't get screwed that way, right?
If there, you will be on the better side of things if there is a double taxation agreement in place between the two countries that you're dealing with. And the other thing is as well, if you're dealing with two countries that apply a worldwide taxation-based system, which is most Western countries, then a worldwide taxation-based system means that they will tax you on your worldwide income, everything that you have everywhere. So if you're dealing with two countries that apply worldwide tax-based system, you want to make sure there is a double tax agreement in place, because usually there's a clause in there that will say one or the other country will be able to tax you and not both. But in other instances, especially when it comes to high taxing Western countries, they won't accept that you will not be paying taxes. Like, they accept that you have already paid taxes in, let's say, a lower tax country, but then they will tax you on the difference that you would have to pay in the higher taxing country. So you don't end up paying again taxes on the portion that was already taxed, but you pay the difference to the higher tax bracket.
Got it. So like kind of to illustrate, if in the US your tax rate was 30% and in Spain it's 40%, you pay your 30% to the US, Spain would be looking for that 10% difference.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to clarify. And then you mentioned the 183-day rule. I love this rule. Can you give a quick overview of what this is for somebody who's unfamiliar with it?
Yeah, so the 183-day rule basically says once you stay in 6 months in a country, you are considered to be a tax resident of that country, and therefore you have a tax obligation within that country. It's a general rule of thumb, I like to call it, because the reality is that there's 196 different countries who have 196 different tax laws, and they all have their own tax residency rules. And although it's a good general rule, the truth is that in certain countries, like in Malaysia, it's 182 days. In other places, it's 180 days. In yet other countries, you can fall into tax residency if you only stay 90 days, and in other places by 60 days. So, there's a lot of nuances to it.
That's why you hire professional people, because so you don't have to know all the nuances. And so roughly speaking, if you're a digital nomad moving all the time, you really have no home. Let's say you spend a week or a month in one place and you're always in other countries. What is, generally speaking, what do people do in that case to pay taxes? Like the underlying question there is, do you just get to not pay taxes anywhere, or somebody wants your taxes, right?
Yeah, so I guess as an American, it's an easy one because you'll always have to pay in the States. But if you're not from the States, and especially countries like, you wouldn't actually think it, but like Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and there's various other countries. Once you leave the country behind and you properly cut your ties and deregister and everything, they don't actually care too much where you're going. You're simply out of the system so far, like we've talked about governments implementing better, I guess, information, data sharing and all of that, maybe in the next 10 years, who knows. But right now, the truth is, once you're out of the system, you're out of the system, and they don't really, you need to give them an overseas address, which will be, your next Airbnb or whatever, and that's it. And so for those people, it's very common to be a tax resident of nowhere, which, is a fun place to be for a while until people
Yeah.
realize that they need to deal with either financial institutions, so banks, or even some fintechs, or now, all crypto tax platforms where you need to go through a KYC process, which stands for Know Your Customer process, and you need to disclose certain information, such as, share your residential address, share driver's license details, where you're from, passport, and in certain cases, your tax ID number. And if the only tax ID number that you have left is the one from your old home country, then that's all you have to give them, right? And then the financial institution or whoever you're dealing with might have an obligation to share your information with your old tax home country. So that's where most of the hesitation comes from in staying a tax resident of nowhere for the long term. And then there's also even places that you wouldn't think of, but in Portugal, if you go back to a formal employment and you deal with larger companies, they actually want to see like where you're paying taxes. Even if you go to them as contract, like I've had people that have worked with larger companies and as contractors, and they want to know, where you're paying your taxes, show us something. And that's where it then gets like, oh, damn it, what should I do? So yeah, for the short term, I see people having no troubles, doing this for the short term, but then the long term, there's always issues coming up. And if you're an expat family, which I deal with a lot as well, kids who go to international schools, sometimes parents have to go through KYC processes as well and disclose, all of their information. And then, you want to have a backup
Yeah.
plan.
Yeah, it sounds fun to avoid taxes until you realize like all the things that come with it, and so it's probably more of a short-term strategy. Of course, as Kathy mentioned, there's about 40% of the audience comes from the U.S. to this show, so you will not be able to avoid taxes if you do the digital nomad life. The Uncle Sam always gets your taxes. There are some ways to minimize your tax burden if you're out of the country. The physical presence test, I guess, is like if you're out for more than those 183 days, then you have some you might be able to share more on this, but my general understanding is like, if you're out of the country for a certain amount of time, then you get some breaks. The idea being you're not utilizing some of the tax resources or the resources that taxes go to while you're there. But in general, you will always pay taxes in the U.S. no matter where you live, and that's a super weird, unique thing to the U.S. I think, correct?
Yeah, that's right. The US is one of only 2 countries in the world that applies that system. And it really applies, to any American, to anyone that holds an American passport. Like, I've had clients who have never lived in the States, but they simply have an American passport from whatever it is, their parents, and they still have to pay taxes to the US. And the worst part about this is that a lot of time people don't realize this. So there's a lot of Americans abroad who move abroad, and they simply don't realize that they've got this obligation that they need to fulfill. I've got quite a few, close friends. Whenever I post something about the US on my social media, they comment and they're like, "Help! I haven't done it in like 6 years," and I'm like, "Oh God, don't tell me! Like, go and look for a US accountant. I don't want to know about this." But
I have a friend here in Spain. He's been here for 20, 25 years, something like that, an American guy. And when I was telling him this, like, yeah, we're one of the only country, thinking like, oh, this is common knowledge. And I'm like, yeah, we're one of the only countries, like, we'll always have to pay taxes to the US. It's ridiculous. And he's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, you have to file, obviously, you have to file your tax return every single year. huh?
Yeah,
He's
it's
like, I've been here 20 something years. I've never done it once. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's
yeah,
technically, yeah.
it happens a lot, and I'm honestly surprised that like American embassies or don't tell their people, so to speak, that they have to fulfill this obligation. And yeah, it just happens so many times. But I don't want to scare people. That's another thing, because there is ways, even if you have never filed your tax returns in the US, and you should have. There's a way, to basically get, I don't know if I call it exemption, but like to just be excused by the IRS if you like filed the last 6 years. They, give a compliant reason, then they usually say, okay, thank you for keeping us up to date and to now do it. But you want to do it definitely through a US expat accountant who, has done that for few other people and who knows how to word it correctly so that you won't have to pay the fines and penalties from the IRS.
Yeah, I think it's a good, like we keep coming back to this, but like taxes don't have to be this big scary thing. Like they're not actually out to like screw you. It's just you need to just go through the process. And again, you can do a lot of these, like a lot of the things you can do can actually be to your benefit as an expat, as a digital nomad. It's just about knowing the system and
Yeah.
or hiring somebody that knows the system.
Yeah, and the other thing that you mentioned, yes, for Americans, I guess your best friend, if you are an American living abroad, is going to be the foreign earned income exclusion, which is what you were talking about before. So there's different ways to fall within those rules, but basically the most common one for people living abroad is that if you spend less than if you spend 330 days outside of the US, then you get an exemption. And right now, the exemption is at around $107,000 per year. So you can exempt up to $107,000 per year of your earned income if you spend more than 330 days outside of the US. So that's going to be your best
One
friend.
clarification on that anybody going, oh, I make $100,000 a year and I could not pay taxes. You're not. That doesn't mean you don't pay any taxes. It's just on your income, federal income tax. You still pay. There's other taxes that you pay, and in our brains, I think you would just kind of all make them one. Like, oh, this is how much I pay in taxes, but those go to different things.
Mm.
And so, for instance, you'll always pay your Social Security tax. Like you'll never get around that. But
Medicare and
is that correct?
self-employment taxes. Yeah,
Yeah.
those are still all added. Yeah.
I'm thinking about this. Like, I have to know all this stuff because I'm an American living abroad. But like you said, there's like 200 countries, and you work worldwide. Like, how do you keep all this stuff straight from all these different countries and like the different laws? I mean, I know there's some broad strokes that are kind of like the same throughout, but it must be quite a lot to try to keep up with.
Yeah, it's a full-time job. Yeah, I don't know. I just really became obsessed with kind of figuring out all of the different tax system and understanding it, and just yeah, it's like a daily sport for me now. And obviously, I have a team around me, so it's not just me. I've got my research team as well, but I try to keep up to date with it on a regular basis. And I also do have a very large network of professionals around me. So I don't do this alone. I work together closely with accountants all over the world, accountants, lawyers, offshore providers. And, we talk a lot in the background that people don't see and
Yeah.
share information and all of that. And so it's a tight network because there's not many of us who are obsessed with taxes, I guess. And yeah. And then, there's so many changes happening right now, as we were talking about, and the digital economy bringing in so many new tax rules, I would say. With the biggest companies in the world being the ones who are all in the tech space, and they don't really have any tangible assets as such. I really think in the coming years we're going to see some shifts in the tax systems and how taxes are going to be determined. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting time to see it all unfold.
It will. And for all of us that hate tax season, we're so thankful that there's people like you that make a sport of it and make it. And also, I will say a compliment to you is like you make it fun through your social media and your blog posts and things like that. Like you make the subject as digestible and as fun as it possibly can be. So kudos to you for taking that on. And we're all glad that there's people like you that enjoy it and can kind of blur the lines between work and play in this way, and you seem to love what you're doing, and it's providing a real great service for those of us living abroad and traveling a lot. So so thank you. I think I don't know if there's anything else you want to share about Wanderers Wealth. I would love for you. We're going to post all your links to your social media, to your website, to your mini course in the show notes. But if you want to mention those here while people are listening, they can go straight to them. And any other little tips, advice, thoughts you have on anything from Bali and Switzerland to taxes, go for it.
I think my biggest advice would always be to people to design a tax strategy around their lifestyle and not the other way around. Because I've seen it firsthand where, I get it, people want to lower their taxes, especially if you come from a high taxing country. But just making money the driving force shouldn't be the solution. Because I've seen people who have set themselves up somewhere in tax havens and they've moved overseas, and then 3 years later they're like, I don't really like this place, I don't want to be here. Yeah, it's great, I don't pay any taxes, but I've got no connection. So that would be my number one advice to people, is to really design a tax strategy if that's what you're looking for, to lower your taxes around your lifestyle and not the other way around. And secondly, there's ways to lower your taxes even in high taxing countries. So even if you're stuck somewhere where you're still paying a lot of taxes, high taxing countries such as the US do have one of the most extensive tax laws. And as you know, Trump, didn't pay any taxes. So it's still able, even if you live in those countries and you don't live in a tax haven or, in a country that does have a tax exemption rule, you're still able to lower your taxes if you know how to. And that's why it's so important to work together with a professional who knows how to do it.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Where can people follow along and find more information, especially on this mini course that I think is packed full of like insanely good information?
I hang out mostly on Instagram at wanderers.wealth is the handle. And then our website is wandererswealth.com. And there you will find the mini course. The mini course is about where to set up your company or your business. I'll go over some of the most tax friendliest countries for entrepreneurs and business owners. And then the big main course is called Global Tax Strategy Design Course, where I really take you on a journey with me to design your whole compliant tax strategy, from tax residencies over to bank accounts, over to company setups and how to pay yourself.
Yeah, it's super thorough. If I went down that rabbit hole a little bit on your website and was like nerding out on a lot of this stuff. So I could see how that could get very, very addicting very quickly. So it's tons of great content. Again, like I would really highly suggest anybody listening to follow along Kathy on her social media and her website and blog, and like where all this content lives, because it's just a wealth of free information. And then if you choose to take it a step further, there's that option to work with a pro as well. So Kathy, thank you so much. And I really had fun. It was very cool to get to know a little bit more about you and your history and the journey that got you to where you are today. So really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my story with your audience.
Absolutely. We'll see you again soon, hopefully. Thanks. Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. You can visit aboutabroad.com to get our latest updates and listen to past episodes, or find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, really anywhere you get your podcasts. On that note, if you enjoyed the show, feel free to subscribe, and if inclined, leave a few stars and a review. It's truly, truly appreciated and will help more wanderers just like you find us. Until the next time, adios from España.